It's easy to think of global missions as, just one steady effort, but the reality, as the sources you shared highlight, is it's a dynamic story of constant change. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at how the very approach to sharing the good news across the world has transformed over centuries.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, that article by Yvonne Wood Honeycutt that you brought up provides a really fascinating lens. It reflects on a gathering of mission leaders and really traces the historical progression of these efforts, offering us a great perspective on some pretty significant shifts.
Yeah. And what we want to understand today is precisely that, those major turning points in how global evangelization has been approached. We're aiming to see what these shifts tell you, the listener, about where things stand now and perhaps where they're going. Ultimately, it's about grasping how the world has become as, connected to the gospel as it is today.
Right. And to help us navigate this rich history, we'll be using Ralph Winter's framework, which is pretty well regarded. His concept of the three eras of Protestant mission. It's a really insightful way for you to understand this journey.
Okay, so let's dive into that first era then. Winter characterized this as to the coastlands, and the figure who really stands out is William Carey. What was it about Carey that set this whole movement in motion from your perspective?
Well, what's compelling about Carey is his profound conviction about the church's responsibility for mission. This wasn't just like a personal feeling. It was deeply rooted in his study of Scripture. And interestingly, his understanding of the world and its peoples was also shaped by reading Captain Cook's journals, which opened his eyes to these far-flung communities. Imagine you encountering accounts like that for the first time.
So he's seeing both a clear instruction in the Bible and a world just teeming with people who hadn't encountered the message. But wasn't there considerable resistance to the idea of missionary work back then?
Oh, absolutely. There was significant theological opposition. The prevailing view among many was that the Great Commission was like a specific instruction given only to the original apostles and didn't apply to Christians centuries later. There's that famous, almost unbelievable quote attributed to a senior minister. "Sit down, young man. When God chooses to convert the heathen, he will do so without your help or mine." Think about you hearing that if you're passionate about this.
Wow, that's quite a discouragement. But Carey thankfully wasn't deterred. He famously put pen to paper.
He did. In 1792, he wrote this really influential piece called An Enquiry into the Obligation of Christians to Use Means for the Conversion of the Heathens. Now, that word means might seem straightforward to you, but it was pivotal. Carey argued that God's will didn't negate the need for human action, specifically the establishment of Protestant mission structures.
Which, when you think about it now, seems kind of logical. But at that point, coming out of an era focused mostly on reforming existing Catholic structures, Protestant denominations hadn't really made creating their own dedicated mission agencies a priority, had they?
Exactly right. Carey's book really shone a light on this oversight and acted as a major catalyst. It directly led to the formation of one of the very first Protestant mission organizations, the Baptist Mission Society, in 1793. And of course, Carey himself then journeyed to India, becoming a real pioneering figure on the ground.
And the impact wasn't just confined to England, was it? The article mentions a student mission movement in America that was kind of ignited by Carey's work. Tell us about that haystack prayer meeting. What made it so significant for you to understand?
Ah, that's a truly iconic moment. So a group of university students already inspired by Carey's writings and feeling a call for, greater student involvement in missions abroad were caught in a rainstorm. They sought shelter under a hollowed-out haystack, and it was right there, in that really unassuming place, that a real passion for missions took hold within them. This spread like wildfire across America and eventually even back to Europe. Imagine you being part of such a pivotal moment.
Right. So this first era really saw Europeans predominantly following in the wake of colonial explorers, concentrating their efforts on the coastal regions and islands. It must have been an incredibly challenging undertaking for them.
Oh, it was extraordinarily difficult. The article highlights the stark realities these early missionaries faced: really alarmingly high rates of disease and death. Some who were heading to Africa were so aware of the dangers that they literally packed their belongings in coffins, knowing the statistical likelihood of, not surviving more than a couple of years. Yet, as Winter poignantly put it, they went in what was virtually a suicidal stream. Consider the sheer commitment that took.
Wow. Despite those unimaginable hardships, the defining characteristic of this first era was a clear geographic strategy targeting those initial points of contact to the coastlines. And the establishment of the Baptist Mission Society in 1793 really stands out as a crucial landmark for you to remember.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It laid a foundational structure for organized Protestant engagement in global mission.
Okay, all right. That brings us to the second era, which Winter describes as two untouched inland areas. And the central figure here is Hudson Taylor. What was the driving force behind Taylor's work, and how did it lead to a shift in focus for you to appreciate?
Well, Hudson Taylor was deeply burdened by the immense populations living in the interior of China who had absolutely no access to the gospel message. While the first era concentrated on the more accessible coastal regions, Taylor's heart was specifically for these millions in the unreached inland territories. Think about you feeling that kind of burden for a largely forgotten population.
Hmm. And it sounds like he encountered some resistance from the existing mission organizations when he tried to pursue this vision of reaching the interior.
He did, yeah. The missions that were already operating were often, well, reluctant to venture into the unknown and more perilous inland areas. This resistance ultimately led Taylor to take a pretty significant step. In 1865, he founded the China Inland Mission, an organization specifically dedicated to reaching these untouched regions.
So the second era marks a real turning point then, a deliberate effort to identify and then reach those inland areas that had been largely outside the scope of the initial missionary efforts. This is a key shift for you to note.
Exactly. The strategy still had a geographic element. It was about reaching specific places, but the target shifted dramatically from the already contacted coastlands to the more remote interior. And Taylor's vision and unwavering commitment inspired a whole new wave of mission organizations.
The article mentions the emergence of faith missions during this period. Organizations like Sudan Interior Mission and Regions Beyond Missionary Union. What was distinctive about these for you to understand?
These faith missions were largely characterized by their non-denominational approach and a strong reliance on faith on God's provision for financial support rather than being directly tied to established church denominations.
Yeah.
Taylor's own model of trusting God for resources resonated deeply with many, leading to the formation of these independent agencies with a clear focus on reaching the unreached.
Right, and it wasn't just individuals and independent missions that were affected, was it? The student missions movement also continued to grow and evolve during the second era.
It did, yeah. The student mission movement that had its early roots in England at Oxford University made its way to American universities and really took off, culminating in the formation of the remarkable Student Volunteer Movement, or SVM. This movement became such a powerful force, and the article points out that the sheer number of American missionaries who went out through the SVM in the first half of the 20th century meant that American efforts became kind of dominant in missions during this second era. It's a fascinating shift in global leadership, isn't it, from your perspective?
It really is. So to summarize the second era for you, the listener, we see a continuing emphasis on geographic strategy, but now directed towards the unreached inland areas. Hudson Taylor and the rise of faith missions were key developments, alongside the significant expansion of the student volunteer movement, particularly in America.
Precisely. It was a change in geographical focus driven by a deeper desire to reach those who had previously been beyond the reach of existing missions.
Okay, now we move into the third era, to unreached peoples. And this is where Ralph Winter's work really becomes prominent, building upon the insights of Cameron Townsend and Donald McGavran. What marks this transition away from purely geographic strategies for you to grasp?
Well, the mid-20th century brought about a significant change. As colonial powers relinquished control, national churches in many of these previously colonized regions had matured and grown stronger. They were ready, and in many cases eager, for Western missionaries to sort of reconsider their roles. This led to a significant number of missionaries returning to their home countries, and some even believed that the primary missionary task was largely completed.
But Winter and others recognized that the situation was more nuanced than just geographic presence, right? This is important for you to understand.
Exactly. This is where Cameron Townsend's experience becomes so critical. While involved in distributing Bibles in Guatemala, he had this profound encounter with an indigenous person who asked, "If your God is so powerful, why can't he speak my language?" This seemingly simple question powerfully highlighted the fundamental need for Scripture to be accessible in every language, no matter how small the language group. This conviction led Townsend to found Wycliffe Bible Translators, with its focus on these often overlooked linguistic communities. Think about the implications of that question for you.
Yeah. So Townsend brought the crucial importance of language right to the forefront of mission thinking. And then we have Donald McGavran and his concept of people movements. What was his key insight that you should be aware of?
McGavran, who served as a missionary in India, observed that the gospel often spread rapidly within specific socioethnic groups, these people movements, but might completely bypass other groups living in the very same geographic area. His influential book, The Bridges of God, really emphasized this idea that cultural and social barriers could be more significant than physical distance when it came to the spread of the gospel. Imagine for you the implications of the gospel spreading like wildfire in one community right next door to another that remains completely untouched.
Right. So even if you had established churches within a country, there could still be entire people groups within that same nation who are effectively unreached because of these socioethnic divides. And this is where Ralph Winter built upon these ideas, taking them a crucial step further for you to understand.
Precisely. Winter, working alongside McGavran, realized that simply speaking the same national language wasn't always enough. There were still numerous ethno-linguistic groups that remained unpenetrated by the gospel, even if they lived geographically near groups with thriving churches. He popularized the concept of unreached people groups, emphasizing the necessity of specific, intentional efforts to make the gospel understandable and accessible within each of these unique cultural and linguistic contexts.
And the 1974 Lausanne Congress was a pivotal moment for this concept, wasn't it? This is something important for you to remember.
Oh, it was a watershed moment. Winter's address at Lausanne really brought the idea of unreached people groups to the forefront of the global mission community. He clearly articulated that completing the Great Commission required this more nuanced, people group-focused approach. This significantly reshaped the thinking in the world of missions. Consider how that might have changed your understanding of the task.
And this vision continued to gain momentum, culminating in the Edinburgh 1980 conference.
Yes, that conference, heavily influenced by Winter's ideas, popularized the powerful phrase, "a church for every people." This became a unifying call for mission movements worldwide, particularly among the burgeoning mission organizations in non-Western countries. It was a vision for you and for the global church.
So the third era is characterized by this non-geographic strategy, focusing on reaching these distinct unreached people groups. And it also saw a significant transformation in who was actually involved in sending missionaries.
Absolutely. Just as the first era was largely dominated by Europeans and the second by Americans, the third era has witnessed a remarkable rise of mission agencies from majority world countries, places like Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The article points out that today, the number of missionaries being sent out for these majority world churches actually exceeds those from the West. That's a profound shift for you to consider.
That is a profound shift. So we've moved from reaching coastlands to inland areas and now to specific people groups, all while seeing a major change in the global mission force. Now, the article also touches on the fact that these three eras weren't neatly sequential, right? There were overlaps and transitions that you should be aware of.
That's a really critical point that Winter emphasized. These eras overlapped considerably, and those transition periods often led to confusion and even disagreements about the most effective ways to approach the mission task. The article provides the example of the period between 1865 and 1910, where first-era strategies were still very much in practice, while the second era, with its emphasis on inland regions, was just gaining momentum. Imagine the different perspectives and approaches clashing at that time.
Yeah, I can see that. And this transition to the third era, with its focus on people groups, sounds like it has its own set of complexities, especially with Western missionaries still active in countries that now have mature churches sending their own missionaries. What are some of the nuances you should understand here?
Well, it requires a great deal of wisdom and genuine partnership. The article mentions the potential for widening the definition of mission to include important work like societal transformation. Now, while this is certainly valuable for the church, it's vital not to lose sight of the primary missionary goal of initially planting churches within unreached people groups where a church doesn't yet exist. It's a balance you need to be aware of.
Okay. And on the other hand, there's also the potential for narrowing the mission focus, perhaps concentrating solely on unreached people within one's own national borders or among diaspora communities.
That's another important consideration for you. While it's natural for churches in places like India or China to have a particular concern for reaching those within their own spheres of influence, the article rightly reminds us that the Great Commission is, a global mandate, not just a localized one.
Right. But it's truly inspiring to see the enthusiasm with which majority world missions are embracing this global vision. The article gives some really compelling examples for you to take note of.
Absolutely. The Korean church's pioneering efforts along the ancient Silk Road, the Chinese churches of their ambitious Back to Jerusalem movement, The widespread initiatives from Nigerian, Latin American, Indonesian, and Filipino Korean churches reaching across continents, it paints a powerful picture of a truly global and increasingly diverse mission force. It's quite something.
It really is. And the article makes it clear that the Western Church still has a crucial role to play that goes beyond just providing financial support and prayer. What does that look like for you to understand?
Exactly. The original call to mission hasn't been revoked for the Western Church. The current need really emphasizes partnership in pioneering a recognition that both Western and non-Western mission structures bring valuable experience and insights to the table. There's a vital opportunity for mutual learning and collaboration.
The anecdote about the Chinese mission workers in a Muslim country being able to overcome objections that Westerners couldn't is a really powerful illustration of that collaborative need, isn't it, for you to consider?
It is. It really highlights the importance of cultural understanding and the credibility that can come from shared cultural backgrounds.
Yeah.
And the story of the Kazakh church, which grew from initial outreach in the 1990s to sending its own missionaries just a few short years later, even while still being considered an unreached people group themselves. Well, that's just remarkable and speaks volumes about the rapid pace of change we're seeing. That's something truly significant for you to grasp.
It really does. Which leads us to Winter's observation about the possibility of this being the final era of world evangelization, given this interconnected global network of churches. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Winter saw that with this increasingly interconnected global church, it becomes harder to sort of obscure the very real possibility that we could be in the final stages of this endeavor. The growing global mission force and the decreasing number of remaining unreached people groups are certainly very encouraging indicators. It's definitely perspective for you to ponder.
So the ultimate goal remains what it has always been. Christ being known and glorified among every single people group, which necessitates that initial breakthrough of the gospel, leading to self-sustaining, Christ-following movements within those communities. That's the core mission for you to remember.
Precisely. That's the driving vision that has shaped these three distinct eras of mission history.
So to bring it all together for you, the key takeaway is this incredible evolution of mission strategies across these three eras, from a focus on geographic locations like coastlands and then inland territories, to the more refined focus on ethno-linguistic people groups. And this has been accompanied by a truly significant shift in leadership, with Christians from the majority world now playing a central and increasingly vital role in global missions.
Absolutely. The landscape of global missions has been fundamentally transformed, and the energy, the creativity, and the vision coming from the majority world is truly inspiring. It's a global effort unlike anything we've seen before, really.
And that leads us to a final thought for you, something to really consider deeply. The article you shared concludes with a powerful question. Given this historical progress and the current global efforts, is it actually possible that within our lifetimes, we might witness a complete picture of God's family that includes people from every single ethne? It really compels you to think about the implications and the ongoing crucial work that still lies ahead.